the genesis of my interest in climate really came from the fact that I was a military guy. And so I spent some time in the Pentagon in sort of the 2005, 2007 timeframe. And I guess it's one of the things, as we talk about the politicization or whatever the word is of climate change, we don't talk about that, the DoD has identified climate change as the number one long-term national security threat for the better part of 25 years. And so when I was in the Pentagon, this was something that was talked about routinely as this being a huge challenge and something that we needed to prepare for and something that we needed sort of all tools to be focused on solving. And so that's what initially sort of sparked it for me, and thinking about, how I could be helpful. And so what that ultimately led to is me and my best friend from growing up went back and worked at a small standby generator company that his dad owned in northern New Jersey. And our original goal was to transform that into a cogeneration company, right? We looked at sort of the skill set that company had working with rotating equipment and things like that, and said, okay, if you guys have a really good standby generator business, there's this opportunity with cogeneration, which is a really efficient way to use natural gas to reduce CO2 emissions. And so we started doing that in sort of the 2009, 2010 timeframe. And then I think the second sort of inflection point for us was Superstorm Sandy. So we were based kind of right in the heart of where Superstorm Sandy did its worst damage. We saw the impact that had on the community, the employees at our company, just the infrastructure around us. And it became very, very clear that, we had to go faster and we had to think bigger about how to do this. And so ultimately, that wasn't going to work out inside our old company. At the time, we were owned by a big British utility, and they were kind of focused on what they wanted to do, and weren't exactly thrilled about the amount of time we were spending on R&D. And so, in a mutual way, we ended up leaving and starting Scale. And really, the genesis of Scale was microgrids need to be built around solar storage systems, right? We have to move past natural gas as, a bridge fuel is what it was called at the time, and really start building these systems as close to net zero as we can. And so that's sort of what began our journey in 2015, and we've been working towards that destination ever since. And so that's kind of how we got started.
I imagine whenever you're in conversations like this, there might be a little bit of confusion around, oh yeah, we're going to do solar, or they confuse what exactly Scale is all about with just a simple solar installation. But you're talking about this on a higher level where you're actually talking about probably risk mitigation and independence and things like that. What's the difference between someone with like a traditional solar installation with what you're talking about with Scale?
Yeah. So when you think about it at sort of the highest level, right, there are three reasons that people usually think about distributed energy as an asset class. The first reason is economics, right? There are a lot of opportunities depending on where you are in the country to deploy distributed energy systems that can help you reduce your utility bills. The second reason is obviously sustainability. Whether that's an individual goal or part of sort of a broader ESG strategy, reducing scope 1 and scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions is a big target for a lot of companies. And then the third reason is resilience, right? And the fact is that the US electric grid is becoming less reliable as extreme weather events and cyber attacks and things like that get worse and worse and worse. And so generally speaking, when you talk about traditional solar projects, they help you on two of those fronts. They help you with your ESG or your sustainability goals, and they help you in certain areas of the country with economics. But most solar systems are not able to island when the grid loses power. And so if you want to be able to improve resilience as well, reliability, resilience, it actually makes the system that you have to build exponentially more complicated. And so that's when you start talking about, okay, from a switchgear and a control standpoint, we have to have the right equipment, both on the hardware and the software side, to be able to island the facility when the grid goes out. Typically, that means you have to pair solar with battery storage or some form of storage to make sure that you can load balance behind the meter. And then oftentimes there's a role for a dispatchable generator as well. So you can get that sort of longer duration resilience in the face of, multi-day, multi-week outages. And so that's really what we specialize in, right? When we're looking for customers and customers are looking for us, it's really folks that want the best blend of all three of those values. And I think that's what we've gotten pretty good at building in the commercial and industrial sector.
Yeah. I'm guessing there's certain industries where the use case or the value prop here is really strong. I'm thinking maybe healthcare, grocery, that type of thing. Where are some of the industries where you're seeing the maybe early adopters to this or the most kind of demand for this type of solution?
Yeah, so it's a quickly changing landscape, right? But I think the way we think about it is if you're a mission critical facility, then we want to talk to you, right? And I think the difference is, traditionally mission critical facilities, the government definition of mission critical facilities has been pretty narrow, focused on healthcare, first responders, data centers, things like that. But in reality, a lot of companies view themselves as mission critical enterprises, even if they're not specifically classified as such, right? So you start talking about, grocery stores is a really good example where, they really see themselves as a hub of the community. When there's an outage or when there's a natural disaster or something like that, they want to make sure the lights are on so they can continue to serve their customers. We're doing a lot of work in the agriculture space right now. Similar sort of vibe, right? Where even if the lights go out, we got to keep food moving, right? And so agriculture has become a big industry for us. And then, I think increasingly we're talking to a lot of logistics companies, right? So you think about, the Amazon, UPS, FedExes of the world, right? As we've gone, and I think COVID really, precipitated this, we could talk more about that. But as we've, sort of transitioned to being more of an e-commerce type society, people really rely on those services to deliver what they ordered on time, whether there's an outage or not, whether there's an extreme weather event or not. And so increasingly, I think those types of logistics companies are folks that are interested in the types of technologies that we build. So it's a pretty broad swath of the commercial and industrial space at this point. But I think generally speaking, if you're a facility that thinks of yourself as a mission critical enterprise, then this is the type of technology you should at least be considering.
I'm guessing there are some groups that have installed this and they already had sort of an ability to sustain themselves, but it was through different sources. And then there's probably some who are just now kind of realizing we have to do this from a business standpoint. This is going to be our first installation of a solution like this. Is it both of those cases?
Yeah.
Is there one more than the other?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, one of the challenges in the space today is that when you think about those three, values, when you think about sustainability, economics, and resilience, a lot of times those challenges are dealt with by different divisions of an organization, right? So the people that are focused on sustainability aren't necessarily the same folks that are focused on reliability and resilience. And I think, over the past, 5 years, right, there's really been momentum, I think, throughout the economy to say, okay, look, from an ESG perspective, we need to be thinking about all of this stuff, not in silos, but comprehensively. And that's really precipitated a lot of change, right? And so I think, the average customer that we talk to now, it's probably not their first time that they're thinking of any of those value streams as independent entities, but a lot of times it's the first time as they're thinking about it comprehensively. And so how do we get the reliability and resilience that we need, but do so in the most sustainable and the most economically viable way? And that's really where we come in. And I think, we're pretty good at helping customers think through how to develop and deploy a system that can help them achieve, all three of those things.
Yeah. It's ironic timing. I literally had just an hour ago, we bought a new house last year. We got solar installed on the
Congrats.
house and we literally just flipped the switch like an hour ago. But one of the questions I had whenever I was going through this from a residential standpoint was payback period, right? Like I wanted to
Yep.
know, can this happen in 7 and 8 years? And it could. I'm like, we'll be here for sure. That's an easy decision for us. Businesses should be thinking long term, but I'm also thinking they want to know what that payback period is. Is it similar for them and for most of these installations, or what does that conversation look like?
Yeah. So I think, the short answer to your question is, especially when you deal with some of the more complex systems in the CNI space, the economic and financial impact of building a project like this is very, very complicated. So, simple payback is a good metric to look at sort of a high level, but then you layer in things like, investment tax credits and,
Mm-hmm.
state grants, um, and different utility tariffs and all that kind of stuff. And this can get really, really complicated very quickly. And so I think that's been a real barrier in the microgrid industry for a long time, right? Which is, people like the idea of this technology, but when it comes to actually figuring out the economics, it's very, very challenging. And look, most of the customers that we work with don't look at generating power as a core, business, core part of their business. It's not a core competency. And so I think there's a lot of hesitancy to, deploy 10, 15, $20 million against the system and keep that on your balance sheet. And so for us, right, the answer to that was we built an energy as a service company. And so the way we do the majority of our projects right now is we finance them, and we have our own essentially private equity fund that we run to finance our projects, that I can talk a little bit more about. But the basic value that we bring to customers is we have a method by which they can deploy these systems with zero money down and then essentially pay for the power similar to the way PPAs work in the solar industry, as the system continues to produce. And what that means for our customers is they don't have to think about the nuanced economics. They don't have to figure out how to monetize tax credits or apply for grants or do any of that stuff. We do all that stuff behind the scenes. And so they don't have to take that type of performance risk. And I think that really opens up a whole new swath of the market that was interested in this stuff but wasn't willing to pull the trigger. And that's really been a key part of us, building a business that can grow and scale.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, it seems like you're offering them less risk on two fronts. One is the independence that comes along with the solution. Then two is if they finance it in this way, you basically assumed the risk and the complications that they don't have to fully understand. Like they can stick to their core business. They don't have to front a lot of money to do it. And it almost seems like it sells itself at that point.
Yeah, that's right. And look, I think that's probably the biggest barrier to deploying these types of systems more broadly is just skepticism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I go in and talk to a customer and I say, look, I can build this system for you. It's not going to cost you anything up front. It's going to save you money on day one. It's going to, help you achieve your ESG goals, and it's going to improve your operational resilience. It kind of sounds too good to be true, right? And so I think, as more and more of these systems get deployed and there's more and more reference cases and we have more and more customers that our future customers can call and, hear that, yeah, this actually works. Yeah, it's becoming easier and easier to get those types of deals done. But that is what the opportunity in the market is right now, right? I think for a lot of customers, you don't really have to make a huge sacrifice in order to benefit from this type of technology. You just have to partner with a company like ours, that can come in and sort of work out all the details for you. And then, yeah, you can get those benefits, right? And I think for most of our customers, they're very, very, very happy with the results, once the system gets commissioned. Now, look, I think the goal for us and the goal for everyone in our industry is trying to make that process, that customer acquisition process simpler, right? Because I think the biggest barrier right now is it still takes a lot of time to kind of figure out how all this stuff works, to get comfortable with the different mechanisms and the contracts and all that kind of stuff. And, look, there aren't a lot of like C-suite people in the grocery store industry who have, an extra 100, 200 hours a year to work on a project like this. And so ultimately for us, the goal is to try to make what we do today as simple for the customer to acquire as possible. And look, I think that's a journey, not a destination. But it's something that, we think about every day. And, that's really where we're trying to innovate as quickly as possible, sort of on the business model innovation side of things, to make sure that not only are we delivering a value proposition post commissioning that makes our customers really, really happy, but the process to get there is as simple and streamlined as possible.
Yeah. What are some of the misconceptions that you're running into when you're maybe early on in conversations? Is there something that you have run across multiple times, or kind of wish that you could talk about it on a podcast and people are like, oh, okay, got that?
Yeah. So look, I think, when you start at the high level, there are a ton of misconceptions about the role that renewable energy can play, especially in behind the meter applications, right? And I think, the most annoying probably sort of narrative that's out there, right, is that solar is unreliable, right? Like it only works when the sun shines. That was true 10 years ago. We've made a lot of progress since then, right? And I think really the evolution of battery energy storage systems have helped solve a lot of those problems. And, the political discourse hasn't really kept up with the technical evolution. So I think, a lot of our customers, when we have those first, conversations, are pretty skeptical that you can use a system that's based around solar to provide reliable electricity, right? Technically and economically, that's totally possible to do in today's market. But, I think there's a healthy dose of skepticism there. And so, a lot of it for us is kind of an education process with our customers, not only to say like this will work, but also to explain why it's going to work. And, in order to do that, a lot of times you have to be able to sort of get into the details and explain the fundamentals and, how the system's going to work and things like that. But I think that's the narrative that's probably been the biggest barrier to us deploying more systems, is people are just kind of naturally skeptical about the role that renewable energy can play in these types of systems. And look, I think we're making a lot of progress. That's changing a lot. I think for the first time in recent memory, there's adequate public support for, public sector support for these types of projects. So that's making the decision easier for customers as well. But again, I think we're making steady progress. It's probably not as fast, from an industry standpoint, it's not as fast as we'd like it to be, or we need it to be in order to sort of achieve our broader climate action initiatives. But, we're getting there.
Yeah. So, I mean, you talked a little bit about like credibility and believability of the solution. And I'm sure with every new installation and, customer that they can call and reference, that helps. But I'm curious, at the beginning of this conversation, you talked about your experience in the military and DoD.
Yeah.
To me, that framing makes a ton of sense. Like it just very quickly adds credibility and sort of frames up how this solution came to be, at least for you guys. Because you can picture that use case. And in some ways, if you're the decision maker on this, it's like, well, I want what they've got too, Yeah. So I'm curious, does that framing help you in conversation for them to kind of understand how you go about it and sort of bringing that experience with you to scale?
Yeah, look, I think that it's definitely helpful, right? And I think, when you look at, the biggest microgrid customer in the world is the U.S. Department of Defense. Pretty much every military base, U.S. military base on planet Earth is being outfitted with a microgrid right now. I think that's definitely helpful in, convincing private sector customers that this is the type of technology that really adds a lot of value to operational resilience. With that said, I think most of our customers also know that the way that the DoD thinks about money is a little bit different than the way private sector organizations think about money. And so I think we're at a place now where there's not a lot of skepticism that you can build one of these systems in a, sustainable way that's going to improve your operational resilience. I do think there's a lot of skepticism that you can do that in a way that's going to benefit the bottom line, especially on day one. And so, I think that's a big part of the challenge right now is kind of translating the success that this industry has had in the public sector, specifically in the DoD, and convincing folks in the private sector that they don't have to make a big economic sacrifice in order to get similar capabilities. And again, right, I think, that's a solvable problem because the hard part, which is figuring out how to do that, is pretty much already solved. Now it's just a matter of sort of getting customers up that, education learning curve, so that they believe that that's the case. And again, I think, as we do more and more of these systems and we have more and more success and we get more and more momentum, that conversation becomes easier to have, but it's still tricky, right? And, these are long-term investments for folks. The average contract we sign is like 15 years, right? And so, people want to sort of dot the I's and cross the T's and make sure they understand what they're getting into. And we totally understand that and try to do the best job that we can, helping them get to yes.
I'm curious, how long had Scale kind of existed in the original model before you got to the energy as a service option?
Yeah. So I think when we started the company, we knew that was where we were going. Right. And I think that was, I mentioned earlier, we started out building cogeneration systems, very similar dynamic there, right? Where the key to being able to deploy those systems and meet customers' expectations was really being able to offer this through an energy as a service framework. And the hard part for us when we started Scale was that in order to do that, you need a lot of money. And so, the first few years that we were doing this, we were kind of jerry-rigging our projects so that we could offer that capability. But we were doing that with a lot of our personal capital, raising money from sort of friends and family to deploy into these projects. It was pretty gnarly, right? It was hard to, raise the money to be able to invest in these types of projects, especially on a one-off basis. And so, 2017 is really when we started fundraising. And it was a very difficult process for us to go through. We were kind of one of the first folks in our industry that ended up doing this. But ultimately, we found a capital solutions partner in Warburg Pincus that has been groundbreaking and game changing in the ability to go out and do these things. And so, now we have, a $500 million equity fund that we run. We just raised $225 million of non-recourse debt, which I could talk more about, which is pretty cool. And we're able to do these projects not only at scale, but also at a really attractive cost of capital. And so, I think that's been probably one of the hardest things that we've done as an organization, right? Is we kind of initially came at this from a very technical, very technical angle, where, our core team was really a group of engineers and project managers that understood how to build these systems, but figuring out how to finance them and finance them efficiently has been a whole nother thing. And, as we've grown, we've been able to bring in a lot of really, really talented finance people. We have what we call a capital solutions team that's run by a guy named Julian Torres, who spent the 20 years previous to Scale running the renewable energy practice at RBC. So he intimately understands, efficient ways to sort of deploy capital into the space. And he's really done an amazing job alongside Ryan Goodman, our CEO, of building out that financial capability so that we can not only build these systems, but, understand the requirements for our customers up front. And yeah, I think that's an evolution. We keep getting a little better at it, every month, every day. But that was definitely one of the biggest challenges of building this business, is going out and getting that, balance sheet to be able to go in and efficiently finance these types of deals.
Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense. I mean, you start with sort of the technical chops and credibility that you can deliver, which gives you the ability to get backers with the capital you need to provide a second solution to your clients, your customers, which is, hey, not only technically can we do this, but you're trying to figure out if this is a good bet to place, a good investment to make.
Yeah.
We'll figure that out for you. And we're good at that. And we can make this easy for you, and we'll take the risk, but we'll make that bet because we're great at it. You don't have to be great at it. So it does seem like you're offering basically two solutions to them, both the technical and the financial.
Yeah, I think it's one of the hard things about building climate tech companies, especially climate tech companies on the hardware side of things, right? Where you're talking about really deploying hard assets, is that being good technically isn't enough. That tends to be where most entrepreneurs start, right? Because it's very hard to, do something innovative in the space if you don't have the technical chops to sort of figure it out in the first place. But that's necessary but not sufficient. And I think around that, core technical strength, you have to be able to build out not just financial capabilities but contractual capabilities, right? So we have a commercial team full of very talented lawyers who help us structure these deals and contract with our customers. You have to be good at building, right? So we have a project management, what we call an execution team, that sort of walks with our customer from the time the contract signed through commissioning of the system. And then you have to be able to operate and maintain these systems post commissioning, and that's a whole nother group that we had to build out. And so ultimately I think a lot of climate tech companies start with, hey, we have a good technical team, and that's kind of the core of our business, and that can help us get maybe the first pilot project in the ground, the first few pilot projects in the ground. But then very quickly, you have to be able to build out those ancillary capabilities, because ultimately that's what the market's for, right? People want to buy holistic energy solutions. And again, they want to do it in a very simple, hands-off way. And so in order to get that, you have to be able to build out those complementary capabilities. And that's been a real challenge for us, right? I think that's something that, ultimately, we've made a huge amount of progress in sort of building out a vertically integrated business. But it definitely hasn't been easy, and it's forced us to think about a lot of these problems and challenges from viewpoints that aren't necessarily intuitive to, at least the founding team, right? And so, that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges. And then you add into that, every energy business, whether it's, a climate tech business or a traditional energy business, every single one is a public-private partnership, right? So you're also talking about, having to understand policy and regulatory developments at a very, very high level, and being able to factor that into what you're doing today, but also what you're doing in the future. And ultimately, you really need a really, really comprehensive skill set internally to be able to navigate a lot of these challenges.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the public-private partnership. I think and your point is well taken. We're in these conversations in this podcast, we're hearing more of these solutions where they started as sort of, let us make the case for why this is a good upfront investment for you, and then a lot of it, not everybody, but some are gravitating more to we will build this core competency ourselves, and we'll figure this out, and we'll handle this. We'll try to make it as easy as possible to where you don't have to actually change too many of your habits or day-to-day routines, or you don't even have to scale up on this. We'll try to do that for you. And I think that's the right direction. I think that's kind of what's critical for some of this stuff to be adopted at the pace that we think it should.
No, for sure. Right. I mean, I think at the end of the day, right, it gets back to making it easy for customers. I mean, look, I think when I first started doing this, 15 years ago, it was pretty common to come across customers who, let's just say, were like skeptical about climate science, right? And part of the reason they didn't want to do these projects is they didn't think they should be spending any of their time or company resources solving climate challenges, right? Or making their organizations, climate friendly organizations. I don't think that really exists anymore, right? I mean, there are pockets, right? And there are certainly outliers, but generally speaking, I think pretty much every business has accepted climate science and is thinking about what they can do as an organization in order to be part of the solution instead of being part of the problem. With that said, that's typically not the first thing a CEO of one of our customer organizations thinks about when he wakes up in the morning. It's not the last thing he thinks about before he goes to sleep, right? And again, I'll just as a random example, right? I'll use grocery stores, which is one of the segments we work in. I think this became really apparent during COVID, right? Where we were talking to a lot of our customers, and they were telling us, look, like, yeah, this is important to us, but I have to figure out how to staff my store tomorrow and, make sure everyone's following the right PPE sort of stuff. And, my supply chain's all messed up and I have to make sure there's bread on the shelves. And like, I got a lot of stuff going on. So if you need me to spend 2 hours a day with you in order to make this project happen, it's not going to happen. Right. And so the only way that this is going to happen is if you guys can kind of take this off my plate. Maybe we check in once every 3-4 weeks on project development stuff, but all this stuff has to be, done by others. Right. And I think that's a very common, situation that we find ourselves in, where, we have to do more and more of that behind the scenes work. So the customer can really just, check in on a regular basis, but doesn't have to be thinking about this all the time because they just don't have the bandwidth to do it. Right. And that's definitely something I resonate with, right? As someone who has been, trying to build and run a business for almost a decade now. People talk to me all the time about things that we could be doing better as a business. And a lot of times the reason we don't do them is not because we don't think they're a bad idea or a good idea. It's because we don't have the time and the bandwidth to focus on anything outside of like our core mission as an organization. And so I think, that's the kind of perspective we try to bring to our customers to say, look, we get it. We understand you guys are very busy with just kind of doing your core business activities. We're going to try to, give you some value here without taking a lot of your time. And that's ultimately, I think, the trade-off a lot of our customers evaluate us on the basis of, right, is we get it. We want to save money. We want operational resilience. We want to improve our carbon footprint. But we just don't have the time to make this, something that we have to work on every day. And so if you can do that all for us, then we're in business. If you can't, then we're not. And so that's the challenge for us, right? Is, how do we deliver that value proposition with as few barriers to doing so as possible?
Yeah, I mean I think that's a sign of a maturation process where you've got all of these things in place, and now you can really think about the customer experience because I mean that can make or break it. And whether they recommend you to someone else was the time and effort or the pain that, was it easy for me or was it painful for me? So that's for sure a next step, I think, right?
No, for sure. Right. And I think, a lot of times when I talk to, the next generation of climate tech founders or just, technology entrepreneurs in general, I think sometimes we overcomplicate this stuff, right? And the message that, I give to a lot of them is the one way I know how to build a good business is just keep making your customers happy, right? So get your first customer, make that customer really, really happy. That customer's going to be a reference for the next 3 customers. Make those 3 customers really, really happy. And now you got something, right? And so I think that's really something that, I'm really proud of at Scale is we think about all of this stuff in a very customer centric way. Where, again, there's a lot of details and there's a lot of nuances and there's a lot of, trends with different things. But at the end of the day, if we have a customer base of happy customers, that one makes it easier for us to onboard the next customer. Because I think one of the best sales tools we have in our kit right now is our reference customers, right? Our customers like us. They're willing to spend, 10, 15 minutes on the phone with a new potential customer to say, hey, here's what my experience was like. And, these guys are for real, whatever the case might be. And that really helps us get new business. But, it also, I think, really helps internally with morale, right? Because at the end of the day, people want to work at a company that is delivering a service or, a technology suite that customers appreciate and they like and is beneficial and is helping them. And so I think, a lot of times we as sort of the entrepreneurial community get really focused on a lot of, the shiny bells and whistles. At the end of the day, if you just think about this in terms of, let's make our customers happy and see what happens. That's usually a pretty good recipe for building a business, in my experience, at least.
Absolutely. I think happy customers is one of the best recruitment tools because it makes for an enjoyable experience for everybody on the inside. You just mentioned that you've passed some of your hard fought learnings on to other founders in this space, and you've been at it for, about a decade, give or take. What is some of when you're a founder, you're kind of a magnet for advice. Has there been some well-intentioned but advice that was just really not great for you? Like you're like, probably good advice for somebody else, but not for us. Is there anything that pops in your mind where someone's like, you know, you guys should really do this? And you're like,
Yeah.
respectfully, no.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it happens all the time, right? And look, I think to begin with, right, this company, Scale Microgrids wouldn't exist if it wasn't for a lot of, what's typically referred to as clean tech 1.0 entrepreneurs who took time out of their day to kind of mentor specifically Ryan and I, but also our leadership team as we kind of grew as an organization. And look, I think it's one of the coolest things about being part of this industry, right? Is people are willing to pay it back. I think everyone, at least at the beginning of this journey, gets into this for the right reasons, right? And we're trying to solve what's likely the biggest problem that humanity has, certainly moving forward. And we're all trying to build a better world, and leave a better world than we found for our kids and grandkids. And we all know that none of us are going to do it alone, right? When you actually sort of understand what's happening in climate, what you realize is that as much progress as we're making and as fast as this industry is growing, and for all our successes, um, greenhouse gas emissions went up in the United States last year. They went up globally last year. And so not only are we not making enough progress, we're not even technically heading in the right direction. And so what that means is we need, just like a wave of new entrepreneurs and just talented, smart people to come into this industry and help us ramp this up a lot faster than we're currently ramping it up. And so yeah, look, I think the I think a lot of people in this industry are willing to sort of go out of their way to pay it back and take time with the next generation of folks and give them advice and mentor them and things like that. To the second part of your question, yeah, look, I think one of the most challenging things for me, and I think a lot of the folks on our leadership team has been at some point, we kind of got into uncharted territory, right, where we're doing things now that haven't really been done before. And so you can touch base with, mentors and, other smart people in the industry to sort of bat ideas around and get high level feedback and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, no one really understands the details of the situation we're in as well as the folks internally. And so it takes, today it takes a lot of self-confidence to be able to make these decisions. And sometimes it's terrifying, right? Where you're sitting in a room with, 5 or 6 other people trying to make a decision about what we're going to do as an organization. And that no one outside that room can come in and give you the silver bullet or, give you the answer to the problem. So look, I think our recipe for doing that was first to acknowledge it, right? That as gracious as people have been with sort of helping us build our business, at the end of the day, this is going to come down to the decisions we make. And then knowing that, right, that means that we have to surround ourselves with the most talented people possible. And some of that requires setting egos aside, right? I used to consider myself one of the best project modelers in our company, right? I am no longer that. Right. I am not in the top quartile of folks in our company that know how to build project models now. Right. I used to consider myself pretty talented on the finance side relative to the folks that are doing this in our organization today. I am not. And so, I think you have to have that perspective that, this isn't, a one man band, right? This isn't like something I'm going to solve or Ryan's going to solve. No one person can sort of build out the comprehensive set of capabilities you need to really make an organization like this work. And no one from the outside is coming in to help us. And so, I think ultimately, we've built a team that I think is remarkable. And at the end of the day, I think we've built a culture where, everyone sits down at a table. They feel free to, communicate their opinions on whatever the topic of the day is. And then we all have a lot of trust in, ultimately Ryan and our board to make decisions. And when they make decisions, we go. And so I think, if you can sort of recognize that, you need to build a really robust talent pipeline internally. You need to create a culture where everyone's, comfortable, communicating and giving their opinions. And then ultimately everyone has trust in sort of the decision maker to say, okay, look, we can't spend another 6 days talking about this. Like, here's what we're going to do. Let's go. I think that's about the best you can do. And then you also have to have some grace, right? You're going to make mistakes. We make mistakes all the time. I think that, ultimately that's part of the process, and you have to, have some tolerance for that built in. And you just kind of keep getting better and better at doing this. And as you have more and more success, that gives you more and more confidence to make the next big decision.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great mile marker that you talked about of, I think whenever one of the founders realizes they're not one of the best at that thing that they were pretty good at, that's a great success marker. You're doing a great job with the talent and the culture. If you're not the best, I mean, my gosh, if you're the best at a couple of things and you're a few years into it, like it's probably not going well,
Yeah, for sure. And look, I think that's, definitely, building this company has been the most humbling experience of my life, right? Because, look, I would be lying to you. I think one of the reasons we started this company is that, Ryan, Howard, and I, which was kind of the founding, the three founders of the company, we were probably a little too confident in our skill set when we started the company. And I'm not sure if that's a bad thing or not, because I think if we were realistic, we probably want to start
wouldn't have started.
In the first place.
Yeah.
But look, at the end of the day, I think that, we were able to be, pretty humble about our shortcomings. And, we had an environment where we could talk about that stuff openly and honestly without a lot of judgment. And that's what led us to hire a lot of the really talented people we have in the organization now, who are making wonderful decisions that are really helping us grow and profit as an enterprise. And so, look, I think that's the trick to sort of entrepreneurship, certainly in the clean tech space, right? Is you have to be a little overconfident, a little crazy to get started, but then you got to pretty quickly pivot to being a little bit more humble and realizing that, you need a lot of help in order to build a good organization that lasts in this industry.
Oh yeah, the process will humble you no matter what. The trick is to be resilient enough
for sure.
that you keep at it. When you look forward a year, 5 years, 10 years, what have you, what do you see as next for the industry, for scale? Like, what do you see on the horizon that maybe others see, maybe they don't see?
Yeah. So look, I think the exciting part of being part of Scale Microgrids, but part of the distributed energy industry more broadly, is there's no ceiling in terms of what we can accomplish. Now, look, ultimately, and I will tell you, this is not necessarily the view of our company, but this is definitely, kind of my view. I think we're heading in the direction of building an electric grid that is primarily distributed, right? Where we're not going to have, hundreds of thousands of miles of transmission lines and distribution lines that connect big power plants to loads, but rather pretty much every building in the country is going to make its own power. And then we'll have a network that allows us to sort of peer share. But that's kind of like 100-year vision, right? But I think if you think about it in sort of that context and you see where we're going, that allows you to, take some bigger risks today, right? Because I think ultimately, we don't really see a cap on where this can go, right? We think about our market size or the addressable market for what we do as being much, much, much bigger than anything we're ever going to be able to supply, right? And so from a demand standpoint, we kind of look at it as an uncapped market. And what that means is what we're really, really focused on is building out our deployment capabilities, right? Knowing that, if we can get, incrementally better and better and better at building these systems and build more and more and more and more, demand is going to be there. And again, you have to have, a certain perspective to believe in that thesis. There are really, really smart people in the energy industry that will tell you that I'm nuts. And that's like a crazy way to think about it. But, I think ultimately, like, if you shoot for the stars and you miss, you land on a cloud, right? And that's kind of the perspective we've had as a business. So we're very, very focused right now on, building out our capabilities, right? Building, we have sort of some 2025 objectives where we want to be from an ability to deploy systems. We have some 2030 targets. We don't really think past then, right? But I think, our general perspective is you kind of put one foot in front of the other. You get a little better at this every day. And we're very, very confident demand is going to be there in the long run. And so that allows us to be maybe a little bit more aggressive than some of our other peer companies in the space today.
That's cool. If people wanted to learn more about Scale Microgrids, where would you point them?
Yeah, so scalemicrogrids.com is the website. We have a lot of good information on there. You can sort of see some of the projects we work on and learn more about the organization. We have a very active group of employees on LinkedIn and Twitter. So our social media star is the director of our project analysis team. His name is Duncan Campbell. So he's the best Twitter follow. And if you follow him on Twitter, you'll learn a lot. Both things that I want him to say and things I don't want him to say. You'll learn a lot about our company on Twitter. And then, look, I think for folks that are interested in this type of stuff, you can get in contact with, kind of whoever you want on our team through our website. We're still at the point where we love talking to people, and we generally have enough time to talk to people that want to talk to us. So if you have any particular, line of questioning or you want to learn more, reach out and we'll get back to you.
That's awesome. Tim, this is good stuff. I appreciate you taking a little time to share where the journey has taken you so far and where it's going to take you moving forward.
No, Justin, thanks so much, man. I had a great time, and it's a real pleasure to be with you.